People may recall that David Rode seems to have been sort of the MS Now, MSNBC hatchet man for President Trump's speech about Chinese election interference. He really took issue with the idea that China was involved in any capacity with our elections, let alone influencing this country in a negative way. Now, what is so interesting about our, intellectual and I'm sure moral better David Rode, who loves to lecture us about what this show is doing to democracy, is that David Rode actually has a history of collaborating with the Chinese Communist Party. Now, to be specific, this is not just some group that if you trace it back by, 7 different iterations, it's tangentially linked to the Chinese Communist Party. This is a group called the China-United States Exchange Foundation that is the tip of the spear of explicitly the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda and espionage operations here in the United States, part of what's called the United Front Work Department, that U.S. authorities have even flagged as working to, quote, co-opt and neutralize opposition to the Chinese Communist Party in Western countries, particularly America. And the foremost tactic that QSEF used, which War Room diehards have probably seen me on this show now, Steve, I think it's going on 5 years since I broke the story of how QSEF takes these Western journalists, takes them on trips to China. Now, most of the time, these trips are subsidized. They're paid for by the Chinese Communist Party. And in exchange, you can see in the FARA filings that are very hard to access, they're obscured, that these Western lobbyists were connecting this Chinese Communist Party influence group with American journalists that they thought they could get favorable coverage from because they would, quote, disseminate positive messages to their audience about the Chinese Communist Party. Nothing that I'm telling you is hyperbolic. These are direct quotes from the Foreign Agent Registration Act. And believe it or not, now you might be a little difficult believing it because conveniently the article where it's exposed that David Rode went to China on one of these trips is actually deleted. But luckily in the War Room, I know we're a bunch of rubes that don't understand how democracy works, but we can access archived articles. And you can see that he proudly says that he went to China, quote, 4 other journalists and myself are visiting China this week on a trip organized by the China-United States Exchange Foundation. He describes the organization, his words, not mine, as run by businessmen with close ties to the Chinese government. He goes on throughout this piece praising the Chinese Communist Party. This is a direct quote. Quote, Americans should accept that large-scale manufacturing will never return to the United States. He praises the Chinese state for developing their economy, compares it and contrasts it to Americans, our work ethic, and literally says that the way out of our economic catastrophe is more partnership with the Chinese Communist Party and, quote, less ideological babble in Washington. It's so ridiculous that this is the, MS Now point person to be saying President Trump is an absolute lunatic for saying there's Chinese involvement, not just in our elections, but in our political system at large, because this guy literally is working with their propaganda organizations. But just look at how he chastises our movement, this show, right? Everybody who didn't believe that Russia was capable of influencing elections for destroying democracy. Meanwhile, this guy is literally on the take, not just from some loosely, pro-China, pro-America organization, an organization that not just should be sanctioned, but the lobbyists who worked for them honestly are guilty of treason, literally spreading and deceiving Americans as we speak with pro-Chinese Communist Party messages. This is who's lecturing us.